I'd love for the religious to prove God exists. Hell, I'd love to see them do anything competently, but sadly, we all know that's not going to happen because these are not rational people. Not even God, the guy who made today's video. He's certainly not rational. We saw that last week. These are people with real problems, not that they actually care. So let's dive back in and see if this gets any better. Don't be holding your breath because, well, you'll see. We're back with God, or whoever the hell this person is, trying to tell us how to easily prove God to an atheist, and so far he's done absolutely nothing but prove what a bunch of imbeciles the religious really are. Keep in mind, he's got easily in all caps, so you know that's what he thinks is the case. But for the first argument, which granted we did stop in the middle of last week, it was just eye-rolling nonsense based on what he already believes to be true, but can't rationally justify in any way, shape, or form. Somehow, I don't think it's going to get any better from here, but hey, let's see.
Now you might ask, how do we know it was God?
And that was how I ended off last week, if I remember right. It's a question that most of them aren't self-aware enough to ask, so maybe there is something slightly worthwhile here after all. He said the Big Bang needs a big banger, and that big banger is God. Says who? That's the same thing that I point out all the time with the Kalam cosmological argument. It doesn't even mention God. Any God, yet the religious always pretend that their God must have done it. Says who? That's when you slam on the brakes and start asking a lot of very detailed questions for which they will have absolutely no intelligent answers. So maybe, just maybe, this might be something new, although I'm not going to get my hopes up. So let's get back to the video and see.
Well, that's simple. The universe is everything. Time, space, and matter.
And now I see that I was wrong. This is just as stupid as I should have expected. This is just assuming your conclusion without being able to demonstrate it. You don't get to just define your gods into existence. You have to show that they are actually real first. You can't just assign them characteristics that you really like. You have to show that these real gods that you've already established exist actually have those characteristics in reality. The second they try this, put a stop to it immediately. But that's what we believe means nothing. I don't care what you believe. I care what you can demonstrate is actually true in the reality that we all share. Because I can do the exact same thing. Invisible, intangible, universe-creating, timeless, spaceless, fill-in-the-blank pixies did it. Why? Because I said so. Because it's what I believe. If you can make empty claims, so can I. The religious just make fools of themselves as if that's any surprise. Be creative. Be prepared for them to run away and hide. So anyway, back to the dumb, already in progress.
Now, if something caused all of that, it can't be made of time, space, or matter. This is a big deal. It means that whatever caused the universe exists outside of time, isn't physical, is powerful and smart enough to create everything, and could do it without something else causing it, which only living beings can do.
All of which is just a massive bald rationalization to get where you really desperately want to go. I can say the exact same thing about the pixies though, right? This doesn't get you to any gods, because the pixies aren't gods, they're just immensely powerful imaginary beings. Why? Because I say so, just like he does. So you haven't proven any gods are actually real, much less your specific god, and you've just flapped your lips and made yourself look stupid, which is not really a surprise. I don't know why they're so interested in doing that, because most of them do it. But it's not something anybody should be proud of, but a lot of them are. Because I'll tell you, if you do turn it around on them, they just run away because they have no other options. Or they scream or cry. Some get violent, but most of them, they just run away. It's not like they can present any evidence for their gods or anything. I'd be happy to provide evidence for the Pixies right after they prove that their gods are real, which they're not even going to try to do. I mean, they started this after all. They should go first. Besides, I don't actually believe it, whereas they presumably do. So, get to it, Christians. Prove any of this is remotely reasonable to believe. Produce your evidence that it's true. Because I don't think you can do it, but, hey, what do I know, right?
But this is not the only way to show that God exists. It's about to get a lot more compelling now. The second way to show that God exists is by looking at what's right and wrong.
Oh, brother, not this again. Nothing is inherently right and nothing is inherently wrong. Morality is entirely subjective. Just hit them with that up front and watch their jaws drop. It's an easy way to short circuit their stupid moral argument because they don't know what else to say. This, again, is just another empty claim on their part. You might as well poke a bunch of well-placed holes in their bullshit before they waste everyone's time, which I've just done. I do not accept your preconceptions. Your empty claims are not going to be convincing to me unless you have evidence that it's actually true. It's head for the hills time again, because what else is new?
Some people leave Christianity because they think certain beliefs like original sin or eternal hell are really bad. They might even say that God is a vindictive bully or a divine child abuser.
Which, if God was real, and that's a big if right there, that could be true. Of course, we have no reason to think that God is real. The God of the Bible is just a projection from its all-too-human authors upon which all of their own foibles have been stapled onto their own imaginary father figure in the sky. And of course, these are really easy to circumvent too, because it's really obvious what's coming next. Something about, how do you make those determinations if you don't have an objective moral grounding or whatever, something like that. Well, I don't need one. From my own perspective, which I'm not claiming is absolutely right or absolutely wrong, it is socially derived and comes from enlightened self-interest and empathy. I can decide on my own that your God is a dick. I don't need an objective standard for that. I can think for myself, which is something you really can't say for most religious people. But I think I'm getting ahead of myself. It's really easy to do in these videos, so let's take a step back and let him continue.
But guess what? These objections can actually help us see that God exists, and here's how. First, if there are things that are morally wrong, there has to be a standard for what's right and wrong.
See? Told you so. But there is nothing that is morally wrong, at least in a universal objective sense. If is not because, remember? Yet that's all they can really do, isn't it? Here are all the things that I already believe on faith, and because everybody has to be just like me, everybody else has to accept it too. Nope, doesn't work that way. I care what you have evidence for, and you have no evidence for this whatsoever. In fact, the evidence that we do have shows what a load of nonsense these claims actually are. That's why they have to have all the excuses to get around the actual evidence that we really have. If there was an objective standard for right and wrong, then everybody would have that same standard across time and space. There would be absolutely nothing else. There could be absolutely nothing else. If slavery is morally wrong, then there should never have been any slavery anywhere, ever. Yet that's not the case, is it? So they have to invent excuses for why the reality that we see out in the real world doesn't match the claims that they're out there making. If you have to make up excuses, then your whole belief system is laughably wrong. And they can't figure that out, can they?
Second, we can clearly see things that are morally wrong.
Says who? There are things that we can look at from our own subjective experiences and think that they are wrong. They are things that we don't want to happen to us, and because we have empathy for others, we can say we don't want them to happen to other people. But that doesn't mean that those things are actually wrong, objectively wrong. Just because my culture, with its generally similar moral views, thinks a thing, that doesn't make that thing true necessarily. It doesn't make it false necessarily. It just is what my culture thinks it is. Those people over there with a differing view, they could say the same thing, and in fact, often do. So who is right and who is wrong? Again, here come the excuses, because they don't have any actual defensible answers. They just really like the idea, but that means absolutely nothing. What you want to be true isn't true just because you really want it to be true. And the religious seem to have a real problem with that, don't they? So number one fails and number two fails. How bad is the conclusion going to be? Let's see.
Third, thus, there must be a standard for what's right and wrong, and that standard is God.
And that's just bullshit. Again, he's just taking what he already believes and just tacking it on the end. I don't get it, therefore God. Yeah, but that's just stupid. No, that standard is the Pixies or Mickey Mouse or whatever standard you feel like tacking on there. Why? Because I say so. Because that's all they're doing, right? But that's still incredibly stupid. That's why all of these philosophical arguments fall apart, because the religious can't get it through their heads just how laughable these arguments from ignorance actually are. When we say evidence, we don't mean these words that we say that feel really good to us, so they just have to be true. We mean things that you can demonstrate in the real world, that we can examine without having to hold any of your preconceptions first, that show that your God, your specific God, is actually real and exists in some demonstrable way that we can actually see and test for. And they don't have any of that. If I was with this God character, I'd be rolling on the floor right about now. How about you?
Now, for something to be the standard for right and wrong, it needs to be three things.
I bet you it doesn't. I'm trying hard not to read the next part on screen because, first, there is no objective standard for right and wrong. That's just an assertion not based on anything demonstrable. This is why having discussions with moral realists is such a complete waste of time. They spend all of their time trying to smuggle in their pre-existing beliefs, whether that be theology or anything else, and they can't understand that all of their own preconceptions aren't automatically real because they really wish that they were. You don't just get to presume your conclusions without rationally reaching them in the first place, and that's why all of these theistic arguments fall apart as fast as they can get them out of their mouths. They are just assuming things that are not remotely in evidence. They just really want to believe it, but that doesn't make any of it true.
Existing across all time or transcendent.
There's no evidence that any such thing exists. You're going to hear that a lot, I assume, because that's how the religious operate. These are just made-up ideas in the heads of the religiously credulous, but none of it is actually demonstrably real, or at least we have no reason to think that it is. This is the kind of stuff you hear little kids telling stories about, but it's magic. Okay, but that's not real. Granted, these stories aren't meant to be an accurate representation of actual reality, but the yarns that we see the religious spinning, they are, or at least in their own heads they think they are. They need to be looked into with much more detail, and that's exactly where they all fall apart. Once again, this is just, it seems to me, theology, and that means absolutely nothing. I don't care if you really like the idea. I care if the idea is demonstrably true, and something existing across all time, or especially something existing beyond time as they claim, that is just ludicrous.
It has to have the right to tell us what to do. That's authoritative.
Where the hell did you get that one? Because this is another problem that the religious have. They are terrified of their imaginary friends. If I don't bow down and kiss God's ass, he might smite me. But there's no reason to think that your imaginary friend is real. Try proving that before you start quivering in your booties. I don't buy that anyone has the right to tell us what to do, at least once we're adults. As a kid, sure, you are completely reliant on your parents and they have at least some control over your actions, but as an adult, not remotely. Now, yes, there are consequences for violating the law, but you can still do it if you really, really want to, because most of us do, at least for the small laws. Most people speed on the highways. Most of the time you won't get a ticket. Occasionally you might, but the vast majority of the time you don't get caught. You know, cop didn't see it, you didn't do it. Now, I'm not telling you to go out and break the law because, as I said, there are consequences if you get caught, and being a dick is probably not a good way to live your life, but there's nothing authoritative about the government or any individual ordering you to do or not do a thing. They just have legal power over you, and therefore there are consequences for your illegal actions, but otherwise it's not really a thing, is it? It's just silly.
And it has to be a living person. Personal.
This is the one that's the most laughable because there is nothing personal about reality. This is just what they wish was true. This is what happens when you start with a certain perspective and then insist that everything you already believe must be true, so there. If you watch a lot of these videos, and sadly I do, you will see this all the time. It's just assertion, not fact. It's what they wish was true, not what they can demonstrate actually is. And it's the demonstration that matters, and the religious never have anything to trot out. This is why I am so entirely unimpressed with religious videos, because they're not using their brains for anything but holding up their hats. And most of them aren't wearing hats. Reality works just fine without some magical man in the clouds calling the shots. And I'm sorry if that bursts your irrational bubble, but that's the truth. Learn to deal.
Why transcendent? Because for morality to make sense all the time, the source of morality has to be true all the time. People or groups of people can't do that because we're not always there across time.
Except there is no objective morality. This is just another assertion. And in fact, earlier today, as I'm writing this at least, a theist showed up over on Reddit and said something about atheists not being able to ground objective moral values without a divine being. Okay, that's easy. There are no objective moral values. That's not how anything actually works. Of course, as we see in far too many religious videos, they are so buried under their mountain of irrational preconceptions that it's no wonder they can't understand the world outside. They just really want it to be true. But that doesn't mean that it is.
Why authoritative? The source of morality must have real authority over everyone for it to really matter. Nothing in our universe has that kind of authority.
You haven't demonstrated that your God is even real, much less worth anything. And I'm sorry, but we've read the Bible. Your God is a dick. Of course, this is where the fear comes in, because they're not really concerned about what their God supposedly says, again, entirely unproven and just based on blind faith. They're just afraid of what this moral monster might do to them if they don't kiss its ass sufficiently. This is a very childish way to look at the world. Because I'll tell you right now, if I had to break the law in order to save somebody's life, I wouldn't be considering the consequences in the moment at all. I'd do it in a heartbeat and face whatever consequences might come thereafter. I am not afraid of the consequences. I'm not afraid of doing anything. I just choose not to suffer those consequences if the benefits don't outweigh them. And of course, there are a lot of things that I just have no interest in doing at all. I rape and murder just as much as I want to, which is not remotely at all, because I have no interest in doing that. I'm not afraid of the consequences. I'm not interested in the actions. For the religious, that's not true. They're all terrified all the time. They are little children that have never grown up into actual adults. And that's kind of sad, isn't it?
Why personal? The source of morality needs to be a living being to make us feel like we really have to be moral.
Who cares how we feel? That's really the thing. If there is a God, and that God says, follow these rules or I'll burn you for all eternity, and we have a good evidence-based reason to think that this hell thing actually exists, then we evaluate the consequences versus the benefits of violating those rules, and we make an intelligent decision. We look at that God and say, well, is that God a complete douchebag for imposing this penalty on us for these particular crimes? And pretty much infinite punishment for temporal crimes is never ever a moral thing. But that's, of course, something that we come up with on our own. That is not what the religious are doing, though. I just don't want to get punished. I mean, seriously, just listen to these people. How many theists have you talked to that will tell you flat out that if God told them to go out and murder somebody or rape somebody, because I've actually seen that before, even to genocide a country, they do it in a heartbeat because God said to do it. They're not thinking, they're just reacting out of fear. But God is going to kick my ass if I don't. Yeah, you're an idiot. That's what these people are, though. Adults know how to stand on their own 2 feet and make their own decisions, hopefully for rational reasons, and accept whatever consequences come of it. Granted, a lot of people don't, but I think there are far more immature children on this planet than actual mature adults, and that explains why things are as messed up as they are most of the time.
We don't have to listen to things like keyboards or chairs telling us what's right or wrong. Now, when you put all of these things together, you get the idea of an eternal, authoritative person outside our universe.
Which you can't show actually exists. This is the big problem with the religious who try to define their deities into existence. Oh, but I want to believe in something that is X, Y, and Z. So what? If that thing isn't actually real, what difference does it make? And that's why I laugh the second they say, God by definition is like this. Well, I'm sorry, but you don't get to just define things as you wish. You have to have a real thing to look at so that you can examine it and determine what its characteristics actually are. What sounds good to you means nothing. I don't care if you really like the idea that a sheep has wings and 8 legs and breathes fire. That's not what real sheep are like. You determine what a real sheep is like by looking at a real sheep. You can't just say, well, by definition, a sheep is like this, because your definition means nothing if it doesn't accurately describe something that you can examine for the details. These people are real idiots. I have no idea what's wrong with them, and if you think you do, let me know down in the comments because I'd really like to understand.
Basically, God.
Because you say so, but that doesn't make it true. And remember, this video is about easily, in all caps, proving God to an atheist. What atheist is going to take this load of horseshit as evidence for anything? Of course, they're not actually talking to us. This is just a means to comfort the already delusional because that's the only thing that actually works. They can't provide any evidence that this God thing of theirs is real, not in any way that an atheist or a skeptic would accept, so they're telling comforting lies to each other in hopes that the truly deluded will stick around and keep giving their money to the churches. That's not anything that you ought to be proud of. If you want to prove God to us, you have to have a whole lot more than your say-so and your childish wishes and dreams and your stupid book that you can't prove is actually true. Let us know when you come up with that, because until then, you're just making us laugh at your own stupidity.
So instead of showing that God doesn't exist, the fact that we know what's right and wrong actually tells us that God must exist.
Except it doesn't, because you haven't shown that a God is real to begin with. You can't just start with, well, it seems to me, and then slap a God label on it and call it a day. You have to show that this God thing of yours is actually real, and you can't do that with arguments. You can only do it with demonstrable evidence. Most of them will just say, but God, by definition, can't be proven. Fuck you. Where did you get that definition? Oh, right, you just made it up. Well, sheep, by definition, breathe fire. So what? They don't, but you can say they do all you want. That doesn't make it true. How do we know that they don't? Well, we go and we look at sheep, and then we describe them as they actually are, not as we wish that they were. This is why the religious are such morons. You'll find a lot of them playing the definition game. God is love. No, love is love. We have a perfectly good word for the electrochemical reaction in our brains that produce emotions. We don't need to call it God. The fact that the religious think that slapping a label on it that's ultimately self-serving to the religion and their churches means absolutely nothing. That cow over there, I'm going to call it God, and now, because that cow exists, therefore you believe in God. Yeah, but that's just stupid. Oh, and the inevitable give money to my church is ever present, right? Because that's really what this is all about. So anyway, we're going to just stop here for the day. It's a little shorter than just chopping this video up into parts, but he ended one section, so I figure instead of starting something else and leaving that in the middle, we'll just leave that for next week. So what do you think so far? I think this is one of the most laughable videos I've looked at in a long time, and that's really kind of saying something, isn't it? Funny, it comes from a channel called God, right? I mean, how fucking incompetent is this God thing of yours anyhow? Maybe that's why this video is getting downvoted into oblivion. I'd say these are some of the worst arguments imaginable for any real God, but they're all like this. This just shows the complete lack of rationality that the religious have. Because they don't care. They just really want to believe. And that's stupid, no matter how many times they do it. So anyway, stay rational, and I'll see you next week.